Hello, I'm Dr. David Luke. I'm Associate Professor of Psychology. I'm a psychedelic researcher at the University of Greenwich. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Ros Watts. She's a clinical psychologist, was the clinical lead on the psilocybin depression studies at Imperial College, and is now clinical director at Synthesis Institute, which is a retreat center for psilocybin. And Ros, I'm delighted to tell you, is going to be talking to us today about her ACER model of psychedelic therapy. So Ros, nice to see you. I'm going to start by asking, you initially started off by developing the ACE model, ACE, Accept, Connect, Embody. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so the Accept, Connect, Embody model was something that I developed for use in the psilocybin for depression studies at Imperial College. So that was for use with people with depression, having individual psilocybin sessions in the context of a research study. So in those individual sessions, we prepared people for the session by doing visualization exercises with them. And one of the visualization exercises was taking the idea of a pearl dive. So a psilocybin experience as being like a pearl dive. And so the Accept, Connect, Embody themes are all part of that pearl dive. So the idea of diving down from the surface of the sea into the bottom of the waters is the acceptance of going deep into your feelings, deep into what maybe you've been avoiding for a long time. And rather than swimming in the shallow waters and the nice, pretty turquoise waters and looking at the pretty fish, going deep down into the dark, murky, the bottom of the sea, and looking for oyster shells that have spiky oyster shells and contain slimy things that we don't want to look at. I mean, oysters are quite delicious, but they're very slimy. And so it's this idea that you go towards them and you open up that shell and you open up to whatever's there and you learn from it. So that's the acceptance part, the dive down into the bottom of the sea. And then the connection part is once you've opened up that oyster shell and you found some meaning there, you found some sense of insight into your difficulties and what they mean, what they tell you about yourself. It's the swim up. So the connection part is all swimming up to the surface of the sea and looking at your life, looking at what's around you, looking at the sky and connecting to your values. And then the embodiment part, so it's accept, connect, embody, is that all of these processes, the acceptance, the connection to values, all happens in a very embodied way. So when people do the visualization, it's all connecting to the somatic sensations of where these feelings are in the body. So yeah, accept, connect, embody. And it was a model, a framework for that study, including these visualizations and various other integration tools for this idea of psilocybin experiences as like this pearl dive adventure. And yeah, I mean, I think it worked quite well for individuals having psilocybin therapy in that context, but there were a few things that whilst I was working in that model, I felt could be developed more. And that's what.
And that led you on to the ACER model. I'm guessing that the water is the metaphor of the unconscious and the emotions and all this kind of stuff.
Yes, yes.
And so you've developed it, you've added on an extra letter of the alphabet to really add something new to it.
Yes, and the extra layer of the alphabet, the R, stands for restore. So it's now accept, connect, embody, restore. And actually this part of it, the restore part, which I'll say more about, actually meant that I completely changed the analogy. So it's not about a pearl dive anymore. Now it's about a forest. So I'll describe why I felt like I needed to change the metaphor and actually the whole model, because the whole approach is different now, a very, very different approach to psychedelic therapy. So when people had the individual therapy that we were doing at Imperial, I noticed that people indeed felt very much more connected to themselves and other people and the world around them afterwards. That was one of the main findings from the research. And part of that connection to the wider world was about connecting to nature. So I kept hearing from participants in the first study and in the second study that they felt like they wanted to go and hug a tree afterwards, or that they felt like they were more open, their senses more open, and that the leaves of the trees seemed so green and they could sense nature in a way that they hadn't before, and that was really restorative for them. And I think partly because I know that, nature connectedness is quite research shows that it's protective for mental health, and that nature is this amazing free resource for people. So if people have a nature habit, then that's something that they can do to integrate experiences and to deal with emotions and to process things. And there are so many benefits from that, that I thought, well, if psychedelics are making people more connected to nature anyway, then that's something maybe we should be really reinforcing and working with. But of course, the other thing is that the context we're in at the moment, ecological crisis, is this is so huge that if psychedelics are making them more connected to nature, this should be really center stage in what we're doing. Because I think often people feel, my patients with depression, they feel hopeless about so many things, disempowered, disconnected, and partly the state of the world is one of those things they feel hopeless and powerless about. So if people can feel connected to it and in some way empowered, like they can make a difference there, then that struck me as important. So the nature connectedness aspect was one of the things that I kept thinking about. But the other thing was that I kept noticing through the first study and the second study that doing an individual session with people with depression, the way we were doing it, their depression went down to minimal or disappeared even for about 3 months. So it went into remission for 3 months and then it came back. And it always seemed to be about the same amount, well, some variation, but often it was around 3 months and then it came back. And I started to realize that psilocybin therapy for depression is not going to be a one-off or two off, a couple of experiences kind of thing. It's a much more ongoing process, a marathon, not a sprint. It's an ongoing thing. So I realized that actually we needed a different kind of therapy structure, which was much longer and which allowed for repeated psilocybin sessions if possible. But I think the main thing that made me change the model is that the way psilocybin therapy was working for people was opening people up. It was making people more sensitive. So it wasn't just like their depression went and they were just depression free and it was just getting rid of their like negative symptoms. It was that people were feeling more open generally to everything, themselves, other people. And that with that openness came a real sensitivity and rawness. And so when people came and they had this experience, they felt opened up, and then they go back to their usual communities where other people didn't know about psychedelic therapy, other people weren't doing this kind of work, maybe less than perfect situations with jobs, with relationships, feeling often quite trapped and very isolated, working with often the aftermath of a psilocybin experience, as you know, is like, can lead to a lot of turbulence. Like it's not always just plain sailing. People feel open up and connected, but they can often feel turbulent. Suddenly all these emotions they haven't had for ages are coming back. They're more open to the whole range of emotions. They've been shut down for a while and suddenly they're opened up to all these different emotions they haven't felt for so long. It can cause loads of disruption in relationships. It can really perturb a system. So what people really needed was a community. We had all these people come into our study and they all went back to their own places and they needed each other. So when COVID happened, I set up an integration group for them all because they couldn't access integration services. So we started like an online Zoom group. And then we suddenly realized the power of collective therapy rather than individual. And so it was around that time when I started to realize that actually I was really intrigued by the idea of psilocybin therapy in a group, like psilocybin ceremonies. And that's when the Synthesis Institute was starting and they wanted to set up this clinical program for people with depression. So this model, the ACER model, is part of my work with them. So I've left Imperial and moved to Synthesis. And yeah, it's this, I mean, I can go into it in more detail, but essentially it's a group process and it's a much longer therapy program.
It sounds a lot more kind of in keeping and harmonious with like traditional indigenous use of psychedelics within a kind of ritual context. It's always done in groups primarily, you know, which is great. I love the idea of these metaphors you have versus the pearl diving of the tree as well. I wonder if that has any kind of deeper resonance.
Yes, it does. So there are lots of different metaphors in the nature-based program. I mean, I use metaphor a lot in my work. I think it's really helpful for bridging people's inner and outer worlds. Really, there's something really powerful about a metaphor that can really bring an idea into life and help people really embody that idea and process. So so we had the pearl diving visualization before, and now for the ACER model, the visualization is of a tree in a forest. So the idea is that they're a group of 8. We've just had the first group of 8 and the second group of 8 are about to begin. And they have become a little ecosystem, a little forest. And each person, we have the metaphor of a tree. So the roots are the acceptance. The roots are what's deep down in the dark, the past, things that they've had to grow around, the idea that their roots have had to grow down around stones. So the idea of traumatic experiences in life being like these big rocks underground, and that their roots have had to grow around those things and form this big network of solidity, but also suffering and pain, and it's all in the dark, and hard to really see and access it, and painful. But the roots are all there. And then the branches of the tree are about values and connection, what you want to grow towards, growing out towards other people, growing out towards the sun, the light. And then the trunk of the tree is where the pain of the past, the suffering at the roots, and everything those roots have had to grow around meets the value and inspiration of the branches. And it's the tree trunk is the body, and it really is the body. That's the embodiment part, where that the trauma of the past can become growth and learning. So we have this visualization where people imagine their roots growing down through the ground from their feet, and they imagine the sap, the black mud that surrounds their roots, like the darkness and the coldness of it, and they imagine the roots sucking up that black sap, that black mud, the cold water, and coming up through their tree trunk, and as they breathe, they're transforming that cold, dark water to sap, which is the stuff of life, it's growth, and it warms as it comes through their body, and it's very embodied, focusing on the belly and the heart, and then it comes all the way along their arms, this sap. And then there is the idea that it tingles at the fingertips, so this cold water is warming up their body, and then when it gets to their fingertips, it's like the buds at the end of the tree, which is this potential for life. And so there's this sense of a tingling warmth at the fingertips. And the nicest thing about the visualization is that they do it as a group, and that all, as you know, like all the roots of the forest are all interconnected in the mycelial layer. So all their roots are interconnected. So when they've done this visualization of bringing up the dark water and turning it into to sap and growth and life, they send out a signal to all the other roots in the forest, a signal of compassion and care, because in forests all the trees communicate with each other and take care of each other. And I think that's the main thing about this program now, is that this group, they're so bonded with each other, they feel such a lot of connection to each other. And when they do the visualization, the feedback was that feeling their roots and how deep they are and how painful they sometimes are, but that everybody else has their deep roots too, and that they're all connected, and that they can send out this sense of compassion to each other and feel the compassion coming back, and the sense of, we know what you're going through, we're going through it too, and it's okay, is, I think, really, it's beautiful to watch.
It's really a beautiful metaphor as well, very poetic, and nice how you've kind of deepened the visualization. And obviously it's one thing to be a solo pearl diver, but it's another thing to be a tree in a forest, in this whole kind of process, and the wood wide web beneath us, the mycelium of the psilocybin as well. It's really beautiful, enriching metaphor. You also have been weaving in this notion of the Celtic tree calendar as well.
Yes. So this all kind of came out of this time when COVID began, when the study had finished, and I was supporting our participants that had had the psilocybin experience, and I myself left London to go and be in nature. So I was in nature for a few months and surrounded by trees, and feeling the absolute gratitude for trees, just to be able to go and sit underneath them and to be able to just feel the solidity of them. And I started reading some books about eco-psychology, and read this amazing one which was talking about the Celtic tree calendar, and the fact that in the Celtic tree calendar every month has a different tree, which can represent a kind of psychological journey in itself. So I got really into this book. It was by Ian Siddons Headingworth, who I contacted actually to say, wow, this is really, it's so inspiring. And he and from that positioning of like learning about the different trees, it started to develop into a whole structure of a therapy course. So now the people in our program, they have online workshops with everybody. So it's their own group of 8, which is their own little mini forest, and they will have psychedelic retreats together. So they've got their own group of 8 and they are their own little forest. But then the online workshops are for all the different groups together. So they have some bits as a small group, but some bit as a big, wider forest. And the content of those workshops is all around. So October is the elder tree, which is the tree of regeneration, because the idea that the elder can regrow damaged branches and can root from any part of itself. And it's a beautiful metaphor for our clients, our patients, and the idea of regenerating themselves and that kind of resilience. So that's the October month, and then we've got all the different trees for different months too.
I think this is really fantastic. I mean, I think it's really great to expand this metaphor, because it takes such a more holistic view, and you know, we are part of nature, and I think it kind of can help to heal that disconnect by kind of framing it in this way. And then there's some kind of practical dimension to all of this as well, beyond that in the program in which you do with, is it nature service and nature-based practice as well?
Yes, it is. So so there are various different strands to the program. They have their little forest groups, so that's sharing circles essentially for their group to bond, and that's over the course of a whole year, fortnightly sessions together. And so that's one aspect of it, the more therapeutic holding open space for the group process to emerge there. They also have these Celtic tree calendar workshops, so every month they come together for these workshops around the different trees. And they also have their own nature projects. So our mutual friend Sam Gandhi is working together with us he's an ecologist, and he, I guess, is one of the first people to talk about nature connectedness and psychedelics as being strongly linked and very mutually beneficial to each other. And
I've disappeared.
Say that again.
No, I thought I disappeared for a second there.
No,
Please
still there.
Keep going, Roz.
Yeah, so the idea that nature connectedness and psychedelics are kind of, you know, they're symbiotic in a way, and reciprocal, or can be at least, and should be. You know, we should see if we can create, you know, strengthen that that synergy if we can. So he is doing plans with everybody in our groups, in our therapy groups, so that they start a few different projects. So one of them is more around nature connectedness, so practices to help increase nature connectedness. When people are depressed, they can find it really hard to connect to nature for various reasons. So it's like finding what parts of it they might like. If they like photography, maybe they do like a photography project in the woods. Different people like different things. And then another of the projects is a nature service aspect. So that's joining up with local networks like canal cleaning or tree planting. And then some people like linking up to kind of green exercises, things like people going on pilgrimage to sacred sites or beautiful places in nature, that kind of thing. So they're all starting their project, and it's an ongoing journey. So the therapy program is a year, and in that year we hope people will really develop a nature habits and nature connectedness and a really strong community with each other. And I have hardly talked about the psychedelic aspect, but at some point in this year-long program, their group will go together to the Netherlands and have a truffle retreat in nature, 5 day, two psychedelic sessions. And our prediction is that people doing it together in this way, after having so much time bonding together, that the experience will be really, that they'll be really safe in that group. And so it'll be interesting to see how the experience is different when people do it on their own with two guides they don't know that well. Yeah, I'm feeling very positive about how it will be for people and how it will offer more than the traditional model.
I think this is really exciting, Roz. I think it's so great. I mean, we're yet to see, obviously, but it has all the perfect ingredients, I believe, for what would make, you know, optimizing all the best possibilities. We know that nature is really, really good for well-being. Psilocybin is really good for well-being. And so to put these things together in a symbiotic and synergistic way, in a way that also has a kind of an ongoing turbo effect, because it makes people more connected with nature. They're actually engaging in more nature-based activities, which continues the process of you know, well-being and also the group connectivity as well, and provide.
Ooh, I've lost David. Well, I think it's actually the end of the talk anyway now, Dave. I just love you, but thank you so much. Thank you very much. What was going to be your final thoughts?
No, just that. I think it's brilliant. You're connecting up, connectivity, community. integration, all of these things is a really wonderful model, and the metaphors and nature connectedness as well. Thank you so much, Ros. It's really fascinating. I can't wait to see the results of this.
Thank you, David, so much. It's been really nice to tell you about it. It's actually the first time really talking about it in this way. So it's all, yeah. And also just want to say that on the 13th to the 15th of November, some of us from Synthesis are holding a online conference, 3-day conference, and people can learn a lot more about this model. So if they're interested in this, then it's called the Fundamentals of Psychedelics. And you can, I think in your chat, there will be a link to it. And I'll be talking more about the ACER model there, and there'll be lots of other amazing speakers talking about wonderful things too. So thank you for having me, and thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Ros. That's amazing.
Bye.